on, you bastard!
Brought to you by supporters who probably have better taste than this schmuck.
Budgets are a tricky thing. Sometimes you can have the craziest ideas ever, only to slam headfirst into corporate reality. Sometimes you have a lineup of figures with all sorts of specific ideas, then the final members are hit with completely different cost allocations and you're left scrambling to figure out what to do. Should these budgets be f***ed with? Probably not. More often than not, it's just corporate barking at the door wanting an extra several billion in the bank, but regardless of circumstance, the designers always have to work around these new restrictions. I wish it wasn't so, as they likely wish the same, but you gotta do what you gotta do. And already collaborative is a whole can of budgetary worms on top of the expectation that fans will buy them anyway, leading to an air of complacency. More often than not, you've got the push and pull of both companies wanting more of a cut. Sometimes even the same company, just different divisions. Because apparently that makes sense. And yet, in spite of everything, the premier Hot Wheels Transformers managed to break through. While not perfect, they provided some of the most fun and inventive outings in recent memory, harking back a whole bunch to a classic Transformers style not seen as much these days. So often the robot modes are skimped on because the vehicle modes are the main focus, but here, these two were actually good, which meant the awesome vehicle modes were able to shine even more. Good toys being good. What a concept! However, it's difficult for lightning to strike twice. Just look at the downgrade from Legacy to Age of the Primes. When a toy line does well, corporate always comes knocking. They always want that sweet, sweet cash, and future toys are always given further restrictions that their predecessors did not. Coupled with the ever-increasing costs of toys due to everything going on in the world right now, these three kinda have the odds stacked against them. I really wanted to get unashamedly excited for these, but with the way everything is going, it just doesn't seem particularly responsible. But onwards and upwards. Nothing for it but to jump into these and see if they overcame the hurdles. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown, and today's diagnosis brings us back to the hopefully wonderful world of collaborative Hot Wheels figures with their second wave, Red Twin Mill, El Segundo Coupe, and GT Scorcher. Again, they really gotta come up with better names for these bastards. I know it's licensing stuff and all, but Mattel really gotta stop being so stingy. I'm just going to call them Coupe and Scorcher for the ease of things, and Twin Mill, because it's like Armada Hotshot with the Powerlinks deco. At least that's how I see it. You know, the car choices seem like the ones you'd have expected from the first wave. Like, think outside of the confines of the most popular Hot Wheels cars for a second. Aren't these sorts of rally and drifter loadouts what you primarily think of when you think Hot Wheels? No? Just me? Whatever. Wave 2 gives us two new molds in some fairly snazzy racing livery. And a redeco of Twin Mill, because Target always wants its red redecos. Seriously? No joke? They're the only reason we got Red Wing back in Siege. Target loves red and Stranger Things merchandise for whatever reason. Now, I'm going to try to not spend as much time on Red Twin Mill as the other two, as I've already discussed most of what this mold does in the previous review, but nevertheless, I'm actually pleasantly surprised with this one. In fact, I'm honestly debating which of the two are the better version. Might take some deeper analysis to pass this. This doesn't apply to the vehicle mode though. None of the new qualities really get to shine here, bar one. The Target Red is unfortunately not as shiny and resplendent as the original. It lacks that shiny fleck that made the original so great. After the first release already had the fandom backlash of looking significantly worse than the prototype, as good as it did end up looking, mind you, this just reads a whole lot worse. It's not a bad shade, nice and rich with a lovely semi-gloss coat applied, but it is a step down. As is the stripes, it's far less encompassing overall, with a much simpler Jack and Meg White approach down the middle, given this is Target's MO after all. The stripes are done pretty damn well, the color matching with the red is far closer, and I actually prefer the smoky grey window as it pops a lot more against the base red, whereas the original blue was a bit too light for my taste. You even get extra paint on the sides with some lovely Hot Wheels writing, much subtler and professional than the gaudy main symbol on the front. Not that it really makes up for the lost paint, but still. And I especially love that he has a much nicer Autobot symbol, one that doesn't get lost in the wispiness. These are all great qualities. They're just not a worthy trade-off for the worst base shade and step down in tamper-graphing. Plus now the grey is also a much duller shade, making it seem far cheaper. And they've costed out the silver from the pipes on the sides. Big shame. I mostly just wanted them to tolerate tolerance these properly to avoid chipping rather than cut the silver entirely. Still, at least the flame effects work far better now, so that's a plus. Now, none of these issues are figure damning. They do make him worse than the original twin mill in this mode specifically, but they don't ruin the design on the whole. Fact is, this is still a swish as car mode that rolls exceptionally, pushes the aerodynamicism to the max, and provides some lovely mechanical detail. And it's not like most of these are simply cuts. While some of it is, definitely, a lot of it has instead been reallocated to the other mode. Base twin mill prioritized his vehicle mode a lot more, like a collaborative figure usually does, while Target twin mill more so shifts the balance in the robot's favor. Perhaps they were allowed to do such simply because Target was already footing the bill, but still. This is a nice car mode, and I'm sure I would have been blown away if I had experienced this with fresh eyes. That's the problem with discussing redecos within the same mold system. As I said last week, discussing all of the differences often makes the weaker of the two sound worse than it actually is. Even in cases where I do kind of hate the end results, it's hard not to sound overly negative without simply relisting all of the original points you made in the first review. If you prefer this deco for this mold, it's basically the same experience, so you're in for a good time. And hey, unlike the States, us Aussies actually have a much easier time coming across them thanks to the exclusivity not really being a factor. So yeah, all that push for the Target iconography and it doesn't even apply down under. It's funny, I actually used to work for Target many years ago, and it would seem even long after leaving, I can't escape this shit. The store doesn't even exist anymore, and they're still yelling at me in my dreams. I still would have much rather one of the fancier decos, such as the truly delightful turquoise I drew attention to last time, but given the circumstances, that was never going to be the case. We didn't know those circumstances at the time, but they were definitely the definitive push on getting this made from the context clues. We ultimately have what we have, and what we have is pretty good. Also, fun fact, apparently Spectraflame refers to the chrome paint style, not the specific version they picked. Guess I can chalk it up to the lack of Hot Wheels autism, and my partner being more into realistic cars than fantastical ones. Anywho, with the chip off the old block out of the way, we move into the new folks. This wave gives us some much more grounded releases, while the other two were definitely a lot more toyetic by virtue of focusing on the franchise's most nostalgic and recognizable designs. These two are a bit more wheel than hot. And I think it's a nice shift. It's a good change of pace, giving us a diverse lineup of cars to enjoy. Sadly, not a particularly diverse lineup of colors, as once again they've gone with red and blue though. I really wish we'd gotten some more variety here, as now the only figure that has a color all to himself is Bone Shaker, but ah well. Starting off with Coupe, he's probably the most reserved of the two. In fact, this alternate mode is easily the most reserved of the whole bunch. Much like Red Twin Mill, a lot of that comes down to his paint primarily being focused on in robot mode comparatively, but even so, he's got a good chunk to go around. I especially love the gold and red striping down the middle and on the sides. It's very vintage, giving this guy a very 60s vibe. Fitting as this design is described as retro-futuristic on the wiki, wherever they sourced that descriptor from. Interestingly, they've taken the design from a more recent Hot Wheels outing. This thing dropped in 2023 based on a carabiner design of a similar thing in 2022. Given the age of the franchise, you'd expect them to pick something a bit more timeless. Could this have been an AstroTurfed inclusion in the toy line? Not really, that's what we have Stranger Things for. Now, while Target Mill sadly pulled back on the plastic shade, Coupe actually brings back the subtle metallic effect on its blue, and it's just as resplendent. As resplendent as that fancy schmancy prototype? No, but hey, good to see this shade return, even if I would have preferred this in turquoise. The contouring is lovely, sort of Porsche-esque with its subtle curves, picked out with some delightful detailing too, such as the implied air intake on the front and the black window louvres. Also really nice to have included the back tail lights, again to be expected on a collaborative figure but not necessarily on a Transformer overall these days. As such, it's a nice touch. The front is also a delight, a crisp white splitter framing the whole thing. Phew, it's good having a non-binary finding I can just ask about car bits. Love you, honey. While some extra black on the air intake would have been that extra step, at least you get some nice headlights picked out. The larger ones do look a bit daft though. I get that there probably wasn't room in there for some clear inserts, but this does look a smidge gaudy. And speaking of clear, much like Twin Mill, though I don't think I mentioned it in the original review as it only occurred to me after making that video, I do feel the window shade could have been a bit more dyed. As it stands, there's just a whole bunch of robot bits on show in there. There's a fine line making clear plastic work properly, and while this isn't terrible, I do think Scorcher did it a lot better. Still, it's nice to have clear windows here. I've always preferred them to opaque, at least when done in the right circumstances. And they're tasteful enough where they don't take away from the livery, which is, again, wonderful. I especially love how the white continues all the way around the bottom, makes him really feel low to the ground, which isn't that what you want a sports car to do? Yes, I watched the Grand Tour now. I vaguely know my car stuff. I am very much a manly man with manly car knowledge, oh yes. There's not really much I can fault him with. Sure, there's not a lot that gets me insanely excited either, at least not to the extent of the others, but by and large, it's a solid car mode. The only gripe I have are these gaudy hinges on the sides, and unfortunately, it's a pretty big gripe to be honest. They really stick out to the point where they can practically be seen from any angle. Especially since this isn't a particularly new and inventive transformation, there had to be a better way to do this. Or maybe not, it could be Mattel not wanting to f with the chassis of the alternate mode. You know, like Lamborghini not wanting their bonnet split on Sideswipe and Sunstreaker, or Porsche not wanting their logo sliced through. Maybe it's in the same ballpark, but even so, there had to be a better way to fix this. Still, I guess you can imagine them as rocket boosters, linked to the blast effect compatibility at the back. While this weapon sadly won't become much in robot mode, it's fantastic to see more traditional blast effects return to the fray. Would have been nicer if these came in a standard set that was at general retail, but hey, a win is a win. Coupe's alt isn't amazing, but that's mostly because of the type of vehicle it is. It picks a pretty standard sports car design, pushes it to the absolute limit of the budget, and that's it. There's not a lot here that really springs out and goes crazy style-wise, unless you're a massive fan of this design or this style of car. The best it'll do is be a pretty good car mode. And that's what it does, it's a car that deserves respect. Even doing so with an obviously limited paint budget comparative to the last wave. But it also stays in its lane quite a bit, which may not be for everyone. Now his retail wave mate is the opposite, really pushing what it's able to do within its allotted budget. Where it falters, it's quite noticeable, but where it succeeds, it really stands out. Right off the bat, this is one stylish car mode, hugging the ground with a stark black frame and blazing forth in a crisp red. The red is sadly more in line with Target Mill, so you don't get that fleck. And it's even a bit washed out with some of the detail. But fortunately, you get enough of said detail to balance it out and push beyond. I adore the fiery clear orange, picking out the windows and implying a delightful engine block. It really helps the top half of the car stand out, especially because this is where you see a lot of that white paint scaled back. You'd expect it to continue out the back, which several depictions do show, but obviously they just weren't allotted enough to do so. That's okay though, they more than make up for it with the killer black down below. It's wonderfully stark and delivers a fantastic contrast, especially on the splitter. And this is where they start bringing back some of that livery. The wonderfully tasteful Hot Wheels text remains adorable, and the 8s are a really nice touch. Honestly, I just wish there was more of it. So much of the design just feels like it could have gone harder. No lights at the back, though part of it makes sense with the big chunk of unpaintable grey plastic. Only a tiny bit on the spoiler, though given this transforms, there's not really a lot of space here. The only part I actively feel could have been done better is the Hot Wheels text on the side. It cuts off pretty awkwardly, which, yes, that is how some depictions of the car do it, but those are all so tiny, limited by plastic space, and proper versions don't do that. They have the text shifted down so it's easier to read, and on basically a deluxe, it seems like a pretty daft choice. Mind you, I think plastering the Hot Wheels logo this broadly is daft in itself, but you know, balances and all. There are other annoyances too, such as the intake section being ridiculously hollow. This one makes sense, accuracy aside, it has to fold up into the torso. You probably would have come across a lot less gappy if there was some stuff underneath there, but even so, it looks way worse in photography than it actually is. It's pretty easily gotten over. The only part I actively get frustrated by is how the top section is just a sea of white. No Autobot symbol, no numbers, just a giant chunk of white tampography. Given the white is a highlight color, not a main shade, this section really looks out of place. And yeah, I guess you could put some toy hacks here, if they actually made some sort of standard set that just improves the base idea, but no, chances are it'll be another random G2 character conversion set. I love these sorts of conversion sets, don't get me wrong, but in addition to standard sets. And it doesn't seem like the team is interested in those, which, fair play, you do you. But even then, you shouldn't have to do something like that. Accurate or no, the top section is just significantly blander compared to everything else. Still, at least that blandness gets balanced out with some wonderful mismatched wheels. I know a lot of folk get kinda angry about these, but I really feel they give them some character. Especially since these are purposeful, not a budget kerfuffle they had to overcome. And hey, painted wonderfully too. Not as cool as the gold on Coupe, but still really nice. It's hard to talk about GT Scorcher's vehicle mode because whenever you put his positives and negatives side by side, he seems a bit It's not an accurate assumption, but you can see why. A whole bunch of negatives versus a few key positives. His light on the mechanical detail, janky on the paint, and hollow in areas he probably shouldn't be. But on the other hand, the dynamicism is off the chain, the base color choices are delightful, and the build quality is fantastic. The first wave was pretty dense plastic-wise, but Scorcher, really pushes that denseness even further. He feels chunky and weighty, maybe not as much as Coupe, but definitely to a level where he feels quality. And ultimately, given he's going for a much more unique design even with all his faults, I'd say I prefer him to Coupe in this mode, and obviously Twin Mill by default. Still, again, 2 red releases in the same wave, even if one is an exclusive, it's still annoying. I genuinely reckon this would have done significantly better with some deco changes, so maybe if he gets a redeco in a wave or 2 later, he'll really get to shine. Though, for now, good alt mode, and probably my favorite of the bunch just on the shaping and coloration, quality aside. Faults and all, these make pretty good car modes. Is that to be expected? Yes, they are collaborative figures. It's very rare we get an alternate mode from this line that is, well, bad. But even so, these are the kind of alt modes I'd love to see more in regular Transformers releases. Of course, given the current trajectory of the franchise, that's unlikely to happen, so at least these 3, and of course these 5, are able to inject some fun into the release loadout, even for a bit. Will we get more? I'd bet money on it, given how well these continue to sell. And hey, there's a good chance the quality of the cars will remain the same, even if everything else ends up scaled back. God, I hope I'm not proven wrong on the vehicle mode quality. I really hope that sentence doesn't age poorly. Now, the engineering is sadly a step down compared to the last wave. It's not bad, don't get me wrong, but compared to what we were seeing previously, it's not as good. Though in fairness, they were living up to a lot. Of course, to save time like I have been so far, I'm not gonna bother showing the full transformation of Red Twin Mill. I've already got a full video covering the original with an in-depth transformation there, so you can just go watch that. So for this, all you gotta do is done-a-rooney. And Coupe is also a transformation that will seem very similar, although I haven't reviewed this mold before, but I have touched on several figures that use the same system. Yes, this draws the same leg conversion from Combiner Wars Dead End, and all of its family members, Titans Turn Chrome Dome and all of its family members, Legacy, Wild Rider, and Breakdown, and this is very much the same style, although it kind of goes to show this wasn't really acceptable. They could already do it really well, and yet they resorted to that. Come on, that's not cool. Well, the first thing you want to do is remove the gun from the bottom there. Yes, it is parts forming, but it's weapon parts forming. Like with Twin Mill, it's okay. You want to untab these panels from the bottom, like so, which kind of makes sense given the transformation style. Shimmy this out just a little bit. That'll give you enough clearance to get the arms out, which will give you clearance for everything else. Unfortunately, these panels have a tendency to fall off. These are optional parts forming pieces, which I am not a fan of. But yeah, basically that just works the way you'd expect. Anyway, you take this panel and bring it to the front there. Locks in softly and also reveals the head. You can bring that panel up a little bit to get out of the way of the legs. Bring the legs down like so. And there's also a couple of other parts that are a bit of a downgrade compared to the previous usages of this transformation style. You can't get the feet out of there. Instead, you're supposed to take the tool, plug it in, and pull it out that way. Like, that to me is a bit of a cardinal sin with transformations. You shouldn't need a tool for something. You should just be able to use your fingies. Like, I don't even have the wonderful blue nails I had last week anymore. These are just my regular nails. And with those, I should be able to just get that out with ease. Anywho, you make sure that these panels are actually locked to the back of it so that it's nice and strong with its knees. Then you close it up, rotate the waist around, put the canopy however you like. I usually like to keep it down like that. Untab these from the sides and bring them around. Bring out the fists like so, and you are done. So yeah, it's definitely a transformation we've seen before, but it's not a very good application of it. It's just, this should be a hell of a lot easier. This should be a hell of a lot more satisfying. Oh yeah, and I forgot to bring down the shoulders. I always forget a step until the end. But this should be a lot easier. This should be a lot more fun because we've seen it done way more fun before. And this just ain't it, Chief. Now, Scorcher hypothetically would be a lot clunkier because a lot of the clearances aren't that great with him, but it actually ends up being a little more fun than Coupe just by virtue of how clunky Coupe was with certain things. Does feel a little bit unfinished though. Does feel a bit alternators-y, where panels just kind of go places and that's it. Unfortunately, the arms can actually be a bit confusing going in here. Unfortunately, the order of operations can be a little bit confusing. So first thing you want to do is kind of shimmy out these panels here. Just bring them out to the side ever so slightly. And that will allow you to bring these panels out and bring these legs down, which will give you enough clearance to move the arms out of the way, the fists out of the way. And the bit that kind of confuses me is the way it's all tabbed together, where this will untab from there, and then the arm panel will clip in there. When it's all together going back into the vehicle mode, it all seems very clunky. It's fine going to robot mode, and I am very glad I filmed things vehicle to robot, because it would be quite annoying otherwise. Anywho, the front bit untabs and folds into into the torso, allowing you to bring this entire front section up and click it into place nice and solidly. The legs clip into place on the double hinges, although not particularly solidly, unfortunately. It definitely could be a bit better there. You bring the feet out like so and bring the ankles out like so. Nice and easily. Interestingly, got 5mm ports at the bottom there for all the combat system stuff. Surprised figures are still using it when they haven't really released any other figures for it. Anyway, you want to bring these panels to the back and don't fold in the ankle like I just did. Then this whole double hinge goes around the back and it just kind of sits there. Unfortunately, there's no locking point because the arms actually lock it into place there, and not very solidly, mind you. Finally, you want to rotate these bits around to the side like so, and you're done. And he feels like he should have another couple of steps, especially in that backpack. But no, the backpack is just one giant frame with clear pieces inside it. I do like that they've added some extra opaque pieces to clip everything together, so at least it's got some extra support there, but yeah, this definitely could have used more time in the oven. It's not quite there, but it's still fine. And hey, at least it's not committing any cardinal sins of transforming like Coupe was. These are definitely just not as fun. They're okay for desk toys, but they definitely could have used more time in the oven. It feels like they took these out a lot earlier just to get more product out there on the shelves, and they didn't leave as much time for them to really settle and really refine themselves. So, by default, Twin Mill, the redeco from the last wave, basically wins. And that's not really fair considering all the work was done previously before all the budget cuts, but I gotta be honest, it's just better than those two. But to make absolutely clear, not bad transformations. I've handled some transformations as of late, and these two are very much not it. Could be, but they're not. They're fine. Don't worry about it. They could be way worse. That's not a challenge, Hasbro. Please don't. Please don't make these like normal collaborative figures where it's just absolute dog shit. I'm warning you. Don't you dare. I've always loved when a robot mode is crafted from its vehicle specifically, when you can tell that it's a transformer instead of a non-transforming robot. Granted, the vast majority of figures are designed this way to the point where the few times they aren't, you can definitely tell. But you know what I mean, those specific releases that carefully build themselves from the alternate mode, like the old Classics lineup. That's what I really loved about the first wave. They very much walked the line wonderfully. Just some really creative uses of vehicle kibble. It was a wonderful sight to behold. But unfortunately, there's occasionally the other side of this style of engineering. Push it far enough and you sometimes get stuck with some very jank designs. And when you put these through the budget cut ringer, of course they're going to come out a little bit undercooked. Though with the simple redeco of the bunch, you wouldn't really be able to tell. He's carried himself pretty well, at least better than the vehicle mode did. Granted, his budgeting isn't as pronounced as they didn't have to sink extra cash into the research and development, but even so, yeah, this is pretty snazzy. The red interestingly comes across as far more vibrant in this mode, likely because it's being juxtaposed with more yellows and silvers instead of the generic target colors. It's a pretty good balance, and it completely rewrites the feel of the figure out of the Tron stylings and into a retro-futuristic race. The yellow and silver ratio is balanced pretty evenly down the middle to great effect. They even brought back the silver shoulder bits that the prototype of standard Twin Mill had, but sadly costed out. So on a pure splotch for splotch count, the red version has a good bit more paint in robot mode specifically. Maybe that's why the vehicle mode was as scaled back as it was. Classic budget reallocation. You add more to one, you gotta take some away from the other. Just the way it is, I suppose. You do lose the trim on the lower shin detail though, so you're left with some rather sad tombstones that do stick out a little bit more up close. Pretty ignorable though, so it's hardly something to get that frustrated over. I still wish he'd had a more prominent Autobot symbol on his chest though, it's just begging for it. And yet the entire lineup almost seems scared of its Transformers branding. Interestingly enough, the head actually gives you some more paint too, with wonderful extra highlights on their head crests. This wasn't an idea yoinked from the prototype either, this is an entirely new addition, and I adore how it lights up the head sculpt. In fact, in general, I think the red really suits this head design a whole lot more. Actually, I'll even take it a couple of steps further as far as robot mode is concerned. I genuinely think this is a step up from the standard release, in vibes at least. If you compare apples to apples, they're basically on the same level, with the same hollowness and proportional issues. Nothing is really actively worse outside of the vehicle mode anyway, and I guess one minor annoyance I'll get to. But personally, I find this way more stylish. It's like the jump from Cybertron Hotshot to Excellion, giving us a much nicer deco for what would otherwise be the same great experience. The only part that's a genuine downgrade is the weaponry, and sadly not just with the coloration. Without the extra paint, it's a bit looser, so do be careful not to lose these flame pieces. Though maybe you would want to, given they're slightly duller than the last one. one. I'm guessing they were gang molded with the windshield and thus are dealing with different color balancing f***ery. Who's to say at least it's an easy enough fix compared to the actual damaging concerns of the original? Guess that makes it more of a side grade than a downgrade anyway. Target Mill is definitely playing on easy mode. All of the groundwork had been done already, and this even allowed him to sidestep all that pesky budget nonsense. But that's no reason to discredit him. Redecos and retools can be f***ed up. Quite easily, mind you. And this doesn't. Maybe the vehicle mode is a bit but it's still not bad. And that robot mode. God, it's sexy. Sexier than the original? Well, I reckon that's down to personal preference. This one does hit that Goldilocks zone for me, but for you, that really depends. But enough about the same old nonsense. Let's talk about the new hotness. How do the new molds fare? Alright, they're alright. Yeah, in an effort to specifically pick less toyetic cars, they've sort of sacrificed a lot of the proportional prowess that the last two had. Not to say that the last two were perfect with the nothing thighs of Glenn Miller and the ridiculously low shoulders of a shake, yeah, but you can tell from a glance that these have been far more compromised. So Coupe does seem to get around it with a pretty well realized robot mode. Well, he seems to get around it at first, at least. I mean, the torso seems pretty wonderful from directly ahead. Kinda bummed out all these cars use the front as the torso with no one really doing anything crazy with the kibble, but as far as a simple car hood torso goes, this does pretty well. The livery and striping come across wonderfully, and the contouring works to the shape excellently. But then you notice it sort of just drops off. It's cohesive, but that cohesion has some weird deliberate choices. Like, look how far back the waist is compared to everything else, and how far forward the shoulders are. Maybe that's why his posing always seems so awkward. He's got plenty of articulation, but none of it seems to work that well. And it makes the cool details such as the torso not really get their day in the sun. We'll say, the legs do look fantastic though. The white coat really helps this pick out all the stepped layering. It feels as if it would be right at home in Titan's Return, minus the mid-2000s oddities the aesthetic would sometimes give. I also really like how they've, with both releases mind you, taken feedback with the legs and gotten rid of that stanky hollowness. Not that it was that bad on the primary sufferer, mind you, especially at the size, but still, good to see improvement. And it all contrasts wonderfully with the silver thighs, nice and chunky, which can be a problem with this sort of conversion, especially the further back you go. Sure, said conversion to Getty was a bit confusing with how it all lines up, but still, these legs are pretty good. Though this kind of white segmentation would have been great up top because the shoulders are just a sea of out-of-place white paint. There's so many cool details here that could have been picked out really well, but instead they just get caked over and washed out. Ironically, using less paint would have made this look way better, because as it stands, they look like they're from a completely different figure. And again, even though you shouldn't have to, you can't even fix this stuff with toy hacks because chances are they'll try to turn him into, I don't know, G2 Hydra Head or something? And still no standard set, kind of a bummer. They look even weirder next to the beady little forearms, so tiny and clashy going from this to this. In fact, the whole design seems to clash with itself. Blue torso, white shoulders, black arms, a grey pelvis, silver thighs, white and blue shins. For such a simple design, it's a bit much. You can streamline it though with some optional parts forming on the forearms. This isn't really my thing, I'm a bit of a parts forming hater, at least for stuff that doesn't become a cool weapon or a combine-a-bit. So I won't personally ever use this, but it's a nice option, as is the weapon. It's a bit daft, but it's a really fun integration of the exhaust system and a great way to bring back blast effects. Now the head sculpt, I'm a bit torn on. Style-wise, it's a great fit for the design, looking like one of the pit crew in a rally qualifier. It's like a mix of Ironhide and Red Alert, real down to earth, but still with that racing vibe. My main issue is the light piping, or rather how they've just got rid of it and replaced it with this really shitty shade of red. What did Thew Adams call it? Denied piping? I think that was it, and it's a real shame. I get that the system has somewhat fallen out of favor with a lot of modern collectors, but I remain a big fan of the gimmick, and seeing it squandered is somewhat of a downer, especially with the red looking as dull as it does. Granted, I get red is a really difficult color to do given pigment depth and all. Yes, I should finally have an explanation for why red and yellow are a bitch to get right up when this video goes live, but even so, it's a bit of a letdown. And yet, that's not what I tend to notice up here, not even the shoulders, mind you. Interestingly enough, the salient feature is the gold wheels. Yes, for whatever reason, these seem to be the biggest thing on show, and they look cool as shit. I feel between those, the torso and the shins, the design really does pull forward. It's a tug of war between its prestige and its jank, and I reckon the former ultimately pulls through at the end. I do wish the shoulders were a bit more articulated though. Proportional issues aside, he uses the ever-dreaded trigger-happy shoulders. While I personally don't mind its usage, these don't have a lot of range to them, especially outwards. You'll eventually be able to get some decent poses out of the guy, but you really do have to work for it. He's a reasonably dynamic piece, but he doesn't initially give that feeling. He feels more like the kind of figure that would excel in a standard A stance, but spend enough time with him, and you realize his strengths actually lie elsewhere. Segi seems pretty simple, but is actually the most complicated figure to talk about in the whole lineup. The more time I spend with him, the more time I like him. That's not necessarily the mark of an excellent figure, and this isn't quite excellent, but it is quite good. This is part of why I like doing these analyses so much. Shining a spotlight on figures like this really helps me pass some of my thoughts with them, and I'm not sure I would have appreciated Coupe otherwise. He's far from perfect, and once again I think the first wave trumps him, but he is a figure I'm ultimately glad I was able to behold. Now Scorcher is a lot simpler. He wears his heart a lot more on his sleeve, for better or for worse. He's a boy who is really wide and really flat, very Alternators-esque, especially in his upper torso. Though a lot of that is exacerbated by the wheel positioning. I get what they were going for, but with the wheels this small, it just comes across as wide for the sake of wide. Especially as there's the wide chest, then shoulder, then chunk, then wheel. It's a lot to get through, though the torso paint does contribute with the transparent orange block in the middle and the white framing the whole thing. I reckon it would have done better had it been at a slight angle, but I imagine they're being purposefully conservative with their design, so it's a limitation I totally get. And hey, the detail is exquisite on the chest and shoulders, a real treat of racing pipes and extra vents. Even the collarbone section is carefully picked out with careful layering and faux panels, as if they had folded in during the transformation. Bit of an odd place to shove a bunch of the detail, but it works pretty well. The pelvis section is gorgeously painted, kinda odd we're getting two gorgeously painted pelvises back to back, but hey, it works with this silver and black combo. And that paint continues to the delightful thighs, working exactly in line with their folding detail, quite similar to Classic's Mirage. Still a great figure, honestly I believe it's the best G1 styled Mirage to this day. Miss me with that 3-pack with the haphazard tacked on shoulder thingo. Now the shins, I get what they were going for, and for the most part I think they pull it off. It's the same compromise as Twin Mill ran into, with the sculpting not being as etched into the plastic as they would have wanted. There's hints of greater sculpting and layering, but it just gets stuck with the lack of room it's afforded. Not helped by the giant chunk missing either, it's just gone. This has a lot working against it. It so easily could have been an absolute shit show. So it's a good thing the red paint goes incredibly hard. The red and black combo gives the illusion of depth pretty effectively, like it's an actual successful version of what the Virtual Boy was going for. I honestly think the only part that actively bothers me is the chunk on the knees. I do think they should have redesigned these to better work with the way the clearance is supposed to fit. They do try, but this probably could have used a ground up rework from the concept art stage. Could it be another case of licensing kerfuffles? Probably not. Unfortunately, unlike last time, we don't know who worked on these, so I can't look into their backlog and see why they made the decisions they made. Hey, DrLockdown from the future here. I actually ended up reaching out to the illustrious Evan, and off the top of his head, he did say he could be mistaken, but it seems as if this was designed by Yuya Onishi, who's appeared on this channel a few times before with some absolute masterworks of Transformer design. He's definitely known for going out there and creating some crazy transformations, so maybe this one just needed a once-over. But hey, it's not hateful, and the design overall isn't either. It's a really nice red Genericon with a pair of black pants. Wait, is this supposed to be a pit crew again? F me dead, that's clever. Probably why his head sculpt is so fresh-faced. Probably could have used some black to tie the whole thing together, but it's still quite nice, and the light piping is killer. I'm never going to complain about light piping. Bring back the light pipe revolution and pump it into my veins. Scorcher is definitely the more ambitious of the two newer designs, playing around a lot more with his proportions, and I think that does lead to a much weaker robot mode. But much like last review and my undying love of Constructicon Maximus, I genuinely prefer robots like that over safe bets that do things cromulently. And the flaws he does have are more just annoying jabs in your shoulder that a high school acquaintance would do when bored, not something that actively causes harm. Not like he's zapping you. Y'all remember zaps? Those were awful. Not even the giant chunk at the back. Yeah, it would have been nice if it folded up, but it's backpack kibble. I've seen way worse, and at least you get a nice sturdy frame around the transparent window piece. My only genuine gripes are with the articulation. Make no mistake, he does have a lot. Everything you could reasonably want is here, but there are 2 points where it does bug me. Firstly, you've got the knees. These just keep untabbing. Instead of having a nice sturdy tab section, you've got this really loose clip that hooks over and accomplishes not much. Bit of a bummer, but you can work around it. And the same can sort of be said about the other issue, kinda. With the way the arms work, they end up being hinged so far out that it looks super jank, not to mention you have to angle the wheel out of the way, which looks so incredibly daft. And because of the way they angle, he never looks dynamic in any pose you put him in. No matter how hard you try, he ends up looking a lot clunkier than he actually is. For as Alternators-esque as his vibe brings, those figures were at least a lot more expressive. It's a bit not gonna lie. But there is a solution. See, these shoulders fit into the torso on very loose pegs, or talking about as loose as the knees. Now, this would be an issue if you don't want the torso on pegging during normal posing, or do you? Turns out if you use these transformation joints instead of the dedicated ones, he actually poses a lot more naturally. Yes, you get stuck with trigger-happy shoulders once again, but this is not a channel that discriminates against shoulder styles. Only shitty applications of said styles, and weirdly, this isn't that. Now, this does make the backpack a bit wibbly if you try to pose both shoulders this way, but if you're clever, you can really make this guy look sleek. Doubly so with the introduction of his hidden weapon stored in his spoiler. A fantastic use of onboard weapons, and a great addition for the posing. Like that toy guy once said, though I'm definitely paraphrasing here, add a sword to a figure and the posing really gets to shine. Then probably something about a Martin wheeljack, I don't know. Also gets to be used as a double blade, but it doesn't work as well. I just tend to use them individually. Now yes, you shouldn't have to use all these fancy schmancy workarounds to fix what is essentially a design flaw. The posing is kinda jank, and it does make you work for the dynamicism that the others sorta just have baked in. But those workarounds aren't that taxing on any play session, and they lead to quite a lovely robot mode overall. Not an amazing robot mode, and I still don't think either of these two are on the same level as the last batch, but it's a nice robot. If I had to rank these three, I'd put Scorcher as the weakest, then Coupe, then Red Twinmill. The last two would probably fit somewhere after Coupe, but I'm undecided as of now, given I'd need to spend more time with them. An unfortunate side effect of earlier reviews and weekly uploads, I'm afraid. Ignore the delay last week. Pretend it didn't happen. But that's not to say Scorcher is a bad figure. The jank he does have is still incredibly charming, at least compared to what a lot of modern accuracy first figures do with their abysmal sacrifices. These are a step down, make no mistake, but in this world of endless accuracy and G1 toy line checkboxing, they are once again a nice reprieve. Quality aside, they still give me the same joy as the last two outings, only this time I'm not so blindsided by it. Does that excuse them, especially Scorcher? No, but it is a context that has to be considered. You may look at designs like these and scoff because there's definitely a greater tug of war between designer expectation and plastic reality. That's fine, but I'm not that reviewer. I'm the reviewer who finds these a fun detour in collecting, and if they keep this up and don't drop to a further level below, I'll continue to find them fun. How you phrase something often has a certain power on how it's perceived. You can say the exact same set of words, but it can have entirely different meanings. In this case, these figures are good, but they are still impacted by their budgetary constraints, is very different from these figures are impacted by their budgetary restraints, but they are still good. And for all their faults, I do think the latter is more true of the second wave. Even when caked in subtle layers of jank, they still provide a wonderful set of inventive figures that work as a nice distraction from the endless mediocritization of generations. They are definitely fighting an uphill battle, and I think the redeco ultimately ends up being the best of the three by default. But they are fun, and they are worth the price, at least in Australia. If that price increases in Wave 3, who can say? Probably not, but we'll just have to cross that bridge when we build and jump off it. And who knows if the corporate glove will squeeze around their necks further? Who knows which threshold we'll end up crossing as this line continues? But for now, these are genuinely good, especially worth the pickup if they're on sale, and most likely at full price if you really vibe with these designs. I'm honestly relieved these turned out as well as they did. I was starting to worry that this channel was just turning into DrLockdown shits on modern Transformers for the 16th week in a row, with the way my review lineups have been going. As good as it is for the algorithm, I don't think I have the innate ability to consistently make modern Transformers suck videos week in, week out. For the sake of my own sanity, I have to engage with figures that I like. I have to talk about the things I'm passionate about. And at least here, I'm glad these three figures gave me that opportunity, compromised as they may be. I'm just hoping things stay this way. I want to continue loving these figures as I have for the past two videos. There are rumblings of things going the other way, but I really hope to be proven wrong about that. But as always, fan and public consciousness is a conversation, so drop your thoughts on the trajectory of Hot Wheels Transformers crossovers below. Are these of the quality level you vibe with, or is this too much of a step down? Do you think the next wave will be even worse, or will they perhaps remain at the same quality? Or maybe even be better? Unlikely, but it's possible. But until the day we find out, as always, remember, there's a context for everything. Till next time.